Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episodes, and this is very important because this is a debate, and I have a good news for our audience because the long time our professional debate team they do debate, and our audience they are very impressed by their debate, and we have a very good show debate in Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. It will be 29 March, and hopefully we will get a huge audience from around the world. And world debate champions they do debate against our World Talent Economy Forum team, Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall. They will join. Professor Donald actually joined with me as an analyst. He will support me. He will help me, and hopefully this will be another milestone for World Talent Economy Forum. And I want to invite you all in our Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. We have a very good team for doing debate. Today's topic is can computer or robot ever displace doctor? Yes, healthcare is very important because in the COVID-19 situation, we find we have a lot of challenges. In one of our program, world famous scientist, uh, uh, Professor Adrian David Chioks and David Levy, they are actually present, and they actually prove that yes, actually robot can replace the role of many healthcare professional. So hopefully we will get a very good constructive debate. From the government side, we have our honorable Prime Minister and huge popular prime ministers because after a long time he is getting his positions, Professor Rob. We have our honorable minister of this parliament, Professor Donald, and we know that we have very strong oppositions. I want to say he like polymath many area. He has a lot of expertise. Recently he's working with NASA for very interesting projects. Definitely we're going to support him. Professor David Smith, and we have our always world champions, Mr. Marshall, from the opposition side. First, I would like to give chance our Honorable Prime Minister, Professor Rob.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you for having me. The position the House is taking is that computers and robots can displace doctors, and the word here is ever. So it kind of gives us an infinite line of advancement to get there. But let's just talk about today how robots have displaced doctors. Telemedicine is a thing. Robotics have been used to allow doctors to do remote operations and they have successfully been done so for at least 2 decades. The advantage, of course, is often it's much easier to deliver a set of expertise electronically than it is physically. You often will not send a doctor into areas that are under heavy conflict, at least not a specialist under heavy conflict, or into remote areas where the doctor may not be able to get to the patient timely. Telemedicine has been effective and continues to be effective when you cannot transport a doctor. But let's specifically look at what a doctor does. The predominant methods a doctor uses to perform their duties are diagnosis, remedy, defining and implementing a remedy, and then for certain specialists, physical operations, and generalists can do operations as well. In all 3 of those areas, in theory, with a possible exception of one, a robot is arguably already better. Let's take operation first. A robot's tolerances are into micro measurements. We've been able to use robotic technology to inscribe atoms. A human has nowhere near the level of dexterity or control that a robotic arm can have, and even a human connected to a robotic arm can increase the tolerances to a degree where they're able to operate at microscopic levels, where a physical doctor using their arm, probably the highest resolution is 1/64th of an inch, and that would be an incredibly good surgeon. A machine can exceed that significantly. In terms of coming up with a remedy, remedies when you have a defined disease is simply a research problem. Computers at the heart of robotics, do research incredibly well. We all live off of large search engines that can find sometimes bad information, but often good information to make our own determinations of how to proceed. Granted, whenever you're using a computerized source, you do have to assure the accuracy of the information and thus the accuracy of the remedy. But there too, a computerized solution not only is better, it's often used because no doctor knows everything. And so when a doctor needs to look up a particular remedy against a disease they've never seen before, today they use the web, they use the cloud, they use computer technology to do so. It wouldn't be hard to get rid of the middleman and just have the robot provide the computer provide the remedy once a diagnosis is made. So the only part of this that might be in question is the diagnosis itself. Now, some of you might realize that Watson, the leading AI in the market, IBM kind of backed out of medicine, even though medicine was one of the first places to place it. And you might think that's negative. The reason they backed out was because information access became a significant problem, and it was thought that it would be better to go to a medical specialist company as opposed to a general computing company to solve the problem, because it was data access that was needed. And we needed to move up the underlying concept of federated data to get around that access and provide the knowledge and information that the AI needed. But do recognize that in the initial test for Watson, which was done in the medical community, what was taken was a particular diagnosis that had taken 3 years of dedicated research to discover this poor woman who had been in tremendous pain for years and had been undiagnosed. A doctor took 3 years to discover her illness and eventually cure her. Watson did it in about 7 minutes. So granted, it listed 12, and it was one of the 12, but it did identify the illness that she had, and of course, it would have taken a certain amount of research to determine the other 11 were not the problem, but it was far faster than the actual doctor was able to do. So in those 3 areas, diagnosis does require training, and that goes back to that: will it ever do it? It's just a matter of figuring out how to federate the data and give the robot the access to the information they need to make the determination. And so that's something that can be done and is gradually being done to do this. And as I mentioned, doctors are using computers today to do their diagnosis. So this would simply be removing the middleman. Remedies are easy. Remedies are used. Computers used for remedies right now and aggressively over the memory. And with regard to the operations, tolerances are higher with robotics than they are with humans. And so in 2 of the 3 cases, robots are already exceeding the capability of doctors. And diagnosis, it's only a matter of time so that we figure out federated data and are able to provide that federated data to the robots so they can make a better diagnosis. I should point out that same data access problem is a problem that doctors have as well. They have no more access or less access than computers do today. The same restrictions that are on technology are on the human doctor. So you could argue in all 3 cases, at least when it comes to being able to do things quicker, more accurately, more safely, that the computer is better. One more aspect before I leave you and we pass on. In terms of being able to remove pathogens and diseases from machines, it's always easier to deal with a robot because they are inherently not carriers, while people are. Robots don't get tired. They don't have substance abuse problems. They don't have fear. They don't have trauma. They don't have marital problems of things that can badly impact a doctor's ability to perform. A robot doesn't have them, and the speed in which you can train robots takes a doctor, depending on the specialty, up to 20 years to become an expert. Once you train one robot, you can train any other robot in a matter of seconds by transfer of knowledge. So you can train them and spin them up far faster than you can humans. And in the case of a large-scale event, say a war, there's little doubt that in the future, robots will be doing much of what doctors do today, simply because you'll be able to deploy more of them faster and more safely. So all in all, not only can robots replace doctors, they will eventually replace doctors.
Thank you, Professor Rao, for your excellent debate and for your speech. Now I'm requesting our honorable leader from the opposition, Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, thank you so much. Your timing of this topic is particularly suitable for me today because in the last 60 days, I've attended or spoke at the major healthcare conferences in the United States, from the HIMSS conference in Orlando, the Viva conference in Miami, the medical part of the South by Southwest conference, the Becker conference in Chicago, and this week, additional conferences in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And many of those had exhibits looking at where the industry believes they're headed. And while the opposition agrees with Rob that there's great advances and that the word ever is a particularly operative point in this debate topic, but it's our feeling that computers and robots will be used for most of the tasks where research has to come into play, where the ability to search through multiple types of disease states will come in play. Robots will be increasingly used in many types of surgery, not all types of surgery, but many types of surgery. A robot arm has a really hard time taking its finger and reaching around blood veins to feel what's on the backside, which is a common part of a cardiac surgery today, is being able to reach and feel and turn angles that robot arms just cannot turn today in a way to do that. So where are some of the points where robots are going to have some challenges? I like to go back and say, science fiction often mirrors science fact. And so I'm going to go back to one of the TV programs, Star Trek Voyager, which had this exact topic in that show. And there was it was set in the 24th century. And holographic doctors were real commonplace in the show, but they were known as emergency medical holograms. And they were called that only because they were intended to be used in the event of an emergency. And that in the 24th century, they were still using human doctors supplemented by these emergency medical holograms. And you begin to see it working. And as it worked well, in real life today, we consult computers instead of doctors already, using the internet to research symptoms and conditions even before making an appointment. But that's still not the same as trusting an actual person. And you begin to look at it. Computers, even the best conversational AI I've seen today, can't have long conversations with patients to tease out bits of information that might be helpful in forming a diagnostic. Nor can they show the empathy to make a patient feel comfortable. And so much of diagnosis today is making the patient feel comfortable with you, having the empathy there with them. And there's multiple scientific studies show that making the patient feel believable speeds recovery, speeds the other elements. And I believe our AI is getting better at empathy. But it's still, particularly in the healthcare situation where life and death are in the balance, you're going to see more of a need for that. And those life and death situations are the real interesting ones for me, is that if I'm in a trauma and I'm bleeding from multiple places, I love the ability to see rapid triage happen and being brought to bear. So far as we look at all of the leading indications today in healthcare, and In the past, I was on the NIH Innovation Steering Committee, looking towards the future. We don't see the ability for computers and robots in the path we see now to be able to rapidly perform triage, to be able to identify rapidly, let's put my hand here to stop this blood pressure. Let me do an incision and put my two fingers in to feel what's there and feel is that bullet against the part of the heart that makes it difficult to do stuff and other things like that. Now, the actual surgery might have robotics to help extract that. But during the triage process, which is so critical within that first 60 to 90 minutes, I personally believe, and this side believes, that a human doctor is important there. And as you begin to look even at the day-to-day process of healthcare, there is a part of healthcare that is so important to use, and we've all experienced it. And when you go into a doctor today, they do something that's called a SOAP note, which is an ingrained part of the healthcare process. And the components of the SOAP note, so the S sounds sort of subjective, and it's the subjective part details the observation of the healthcare provider of the patient. And it takes feedback from the patient and what you see. Then you have objective, the O of the part, and that's the vital, pulse rate, temperature, and all those. And yes, can we use robotics? Can we use AI? Can we use Internet of Things and others for that? Yes, and it's being done today. But the O part is the objective. Then the A part of it is an assessment. And this is where the diagnosis of the patient is addressed, what the interpretations are, and what are the various reasons. And then the P is plan, which is a treatment plan of that patient after they go through the SOAP note process. Yes, artificial intelligence can be applied to parts of that. Yes, robotics can be applied to parts of that. But the basis behind the SOAP note is that you're looking for intangibles of the patient's care. Our AI today, our vision recognition programs, all of those elements have to be brought into play. But that subjective part, that intangible part of what we as humans have felt and experienced, how we can read the body language, how we can look at the eye movements, how we can begin to feel the fever. Is it truly a fever, or is one part of the head warm, or are the hands cold? What's the color of the expenditures? Are your legs and fingers turning blue because of blood circulation issues that you can see during triage? So the opposition believes that yes, robotics, machine vision, artificial intelligence, all will play in advancing the future of healthcare. We've come a long ways to doing that in the last 5 years, even though the IBM Watson program, as Rob talked about earlier, has been a failure in healthcare. Major research institutions who were used healthcare have actually removed it from their systems and have stopped using it and supplemented with others. But yes, it will play. It's a necessary part, particularly as we look at the world population growth, as we look at the shortages we're going to have in doctors, the shortages we're going to have in physician assistants, the shortages in medical assistants, and even in other technician areas of healthcare. But it will not 100% supplement the human in interacting with patients. Will they fill a big gap? 100%. But it will not completely replace the human doctor, the human physician assistant, the human nurse that's necessary for part of the healthcare experience today. So that is the initial response from the opposition.
Thank you, Honorable David Smith, for your excellent debate and analysis. Now I request our Minister for today's Parliament, Minister of Technology and Health, Professor Donald.
Well, I'm going to lean on the timeline where it says ever, because some of these things are going to take some time. But I think we know now, we understand that the biggest problem with artificial intelligence, robots, and being able to communicate with people is the inability of computer systems to do any sort of what's called abduction, which is forming hypotheses and guessing. And that's a critical part of what doctors do, because sometimes you wind up with somebody who's got symptoms that 99% are something, but 1% could be 20 other things. And so what they do is what's called a differential diagnosis. So they make a guess at what the most probable thing is and then treat that. And if that doesn't work, then they ask themselves the question, okay, that's not what it is. It's got to be one of these other 20 things. And they basically loop through a guessing thing like that. And that's something we've been having a bit of difficulty figuring out how to get computers to do. But that doesn't mean we won't. I mean, people are working on it, and we're making breakthroughs on all of these on a regular basis. The whole thing about empathy is important, but like in our persuasive technology group in Finland, we are specifically looking at how technology can be changed to use health behaviors. And people are more influenced by the material world around them than you might think. When our phones beep at us, when we look at our trackers, all the different kinds of things about that, all of those kinds of things are changing our behavior. So right now we're at a point where we're starting to be able to get data. Now, data isn't going to solve the problem. I mean, as you know, I'm fond of saying, if data was all you needed to do, then you could study geology by going to a gravel pit and counting the gravel and telling what color it is and recording what color it is and hoping you find something of interest. That's not the way it works. We have to understand what we're looking for, and being able to do this abduction, but we are understanding that, and since we're gaining understanding, the amount of data that we have will allow us to be able to allow computers to interact with people in a way that fools them into thinking that the computer is being empathetic. And to be more specific, if you say something to somebody and you're getting them upset and you're watching them, you can see that their muscles start tightening their body starts to get into a flight or fight response. Their breathing changes. You can see that. I mean, you're probably not conscious of it, but you know. So that when a doctor's talking to somebody, they know, okay, what I just said is making this person really uncomfortable. I have to say it in a different way. I have to see if I can get them to understand why it's important to them and get them to change their behavior. But now with the kind of devices that we can hook up to people, the computer can know that as well. So we're still, unfortunately, at a phase where the best that computers can do is just look things up. So that was why Watson, which was very, very good at playing Jeopardy, where it looked up the answers in Wikipedia, that doesn't work necessarily for something as complicated as the human body, which is, you know, infinitely more complicated than Jeopardy. But we're starting to be able to get the data. In the United States, the Supreme Court's about to rule that we don't have any right to privacy. So, I mean, that's going to be an interesting kettle of fish to see what's going to wind up happening for that. We might wind up getting more data than we could possibly imagine in just a very short period of time. So as somebody pointed out, one of the barriers is rules about privacy and rules about data acquisition. And if those go away, then we'll be able to have a remarkable amount of data that we can use to teach ourselves how we can get the computers to make the kind of guesses that we need to be able to communicate with people the way that people communicate with each other. And all of these problems get solved. So once that one is solved, we won't, in most cases, we probably won't need doctors anymore.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Now I request from our opposition side, Mr. Marshall.
Well, thank you, Sharif, and thank you, members of the Parliament. As everybody's been talking about, the government believes that we're going to replace medical professionals with robots. I'm not so sure that they themselves would want to have open heart surgery or brain surgery from a robot. I'm not sure they're willing to take that risk at this current time. Maybe after the next generation or the generation after that, their great-grandchildren might be doing that, but I don't think you're going to see that in our generation or the next generation that soon. One of the classic arguments that people, and I haven't heard it from the government yet, but I'm sure they're going to bring it up, is that the reason that we're going to need robots to perform medical procedures and diagnosis is because of the amount of doctors that are graduating and who's going to replace them. In our country here, in this parliament, we have the same issues as they have in other parts of the Western world. Doctors are graduating at usually a 4 to 12% increase around the Western world in Europe or in the United States. But and I think our statistics are the same. But the amount of people that require medical care is growing, especially in our country where we have a form of guaranteed coverage. And unlike the United States, which just acquired that through the ACA law there, I think what we're going to see is the push towards medical technology to replace doctors and healthcare workers. However, one thing we do know that in the Western world, there is a complete growth of assistance for medical doctors. And there's generally two kinds of medical doctors and a fourth category. The first category is the general practitioner. And are we going to create robots out of general practitioners? I don't think so. Are we going to create specialists who do specific types of surgeries and procedures that takes a lot of education and knowledge to put forth, especially how the procedure is handling it? A lot of it takes manual dexterity and thinking on the spot. I know this from personal fact because my family underwent surgery, and my father had surgery performed on him. And what happened is the doctor had to make a different analysis once he went in. Turned out my father had 3 kidneys. That was not something that was seen even with all the diagnostics. And that changed the way the procedure went. So I think that robotics can help in the medical procedure. And we know that because we see it in Japan right now, that there are robots actually taking care of elderly people. And that goes to the heart of the demographics. Demographics play a huge role in pushing this forward. In places like Japan, where the elderly population is growing exponentially, and you're not going to necessarily have all the healthcare professionals you need, you might want robots to help take care of those patients. But are they going to do the actual procedures that are required? I think we're always going to see human interaction and interface in that. And as the Prime Minister, Rob, pointed out, there's been success in this process with doctors performing these surgeries remotely. But who's performing the surgery? The robot or the human? Even remotely, even using technology to do it. It's human interaction, human knowledge, human eyesight, human feelings, human dexterity, that is making the decisions at this point in time. I don't know of any surgical instruments that are automatic and not without human interaction. So I think we need to be careful in this response. And as the opposition, I think that the shortfall in primary care physicians could run, anywhere from 12,000 to 30,000 in our country. And for non-primary care physicians, the shortfall could be between 28,000 and 63,000. If that's the case, then where do we make that up? Well, although our healthcare process demands an increased demand for physicians because more people will have access to healthcare right now, insurance and other things like that already automatically in our country, and we're seeing that in the Western world. To reduce the shortfall, to lower the ends of the ranges, the healthcare system will need to have multiple strategies, not one strategy, to offset the lack of doctors. And among those are improved technology, as they're talking about, but not the technology that's actually going to perform the surgeries, and greater dependence on physician assistants and nurse practitioners. And we're seeing certified nurse midwives and nurse anesthesiologists to be able to go out there and perform those procedures. I don't see robots doing anesthesia anytime soon, and I certainly don't see robots doing the surgical components. I do see that we're going to need more physician assistants and nurse practitioners and certified nurses to be able to do practice in this realm, and we can get them. That can overcome the lack of physical doctors out there, even though it's growing at about probably a 4% rate. So from the opposition's point of view, the critical care should be in the hands of humans, not robots. Critical care should be in the hands of people with the ability to diagnose and understand and make mid-changes and mid-course corrections. Robots are programmed. They run on algorithms. Even the ones with AI, artificial intelligence, are unable to maintain the decision-making process that a human can do it. Not to say that humans are perfect. They're not. But the difference is, I think most of the people on this panel and most of our citizens out there would prefer to have humans making the decisions and humans making the surgical implementations. Just like you wouldn't want a robot to build a building that collapses on somebody because it thinks it can build a building when you need all that human interaction to interface with the data that is there. It's true, a lot of data is there. We're using a lot of technology to gather data and turn it into information, but the information doesn't perform the surgery. It's humans that perform the surgery. It's humans that perform the anesthesia. It's humans that determine what level, so that when things go wrong, because you're performing surgery not on robots. If you want to have a robot perform surgery on a robot, be my guest. I don't think any of our citizens would have a problem with that, unless, of course, it blows up and harms humans. But the thing is that when humans are performing surgery, they're in a position to make a diagnosis and a change in course rapidly, much more rapidly than a robot. And not only that, the robots are performing surgery. If they're going to perform surgery or anesthesia on a human, what happens if things go wrong? Who's going to be responsible? The robot? I don't think so. I think the prime minister and this government are going to be held responsible. And that will put us into that will put my head of government and myself and all our parliamentarians into office very rapidly. So this is a warning to the opposition, to the head of government. We honor your service to our country, but don't put our citizens at risk. That's what you're doing if you put robots on the hands of the surgery and the anesthesia in these critical care environments.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall, for your excellent speech. Now, time for closing remarks. First, I request our opposition leader of the parliament, Professor David Smith, and there are some point of information from our audience. If both of our parliament leaders respond, that will be fine for us. Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been interesting listening to the debate. And as you go there and look at the questions that are coming with it too, it kind of helps support what we're saying. Like the one on the screen right now, the computers and robots can help doctors do better. And that's some of the reasons for us. But as has been so well pointed out, that they cannot do everything, and they cannot do it well. And the other question, will the robot revolution lead to mass unemployment? I don't think it's going to be unemployment, but what I think it will be is supplementation. I'll give you my real world example. Wednesday night, I went and ate dinner, and robots brought the food from the kitchen out to the table, where then the waiter served it to us. If you go into the modern acute care hospital today, you're going to see robots used for many functions. You're going to see robots being used to bring your prescriptions from the hospital, from their pharmacy, and it will be delivered up to your floor and unit dosage to give to you. If you go into the operating rooms and where they're taking specimens and biopsies to be sent to the lab to be processed, in many instances today, instead of taking a nurse and having them go floors away to deliver that to the labs, they're using robots in the hospitals to do that. Those are fantastic functions for using robots in there. Where you're seeing particularly minimally invasive surgery, you're seeing robots used all the time. I was actually involved in the early 2000s with one of the first robot surgeries that was done from Johns Hopkins in the United States over to Singapore, where that surgery was done remotely. Are you going to see in situations like that? 100%. You look into the military, like was mentioned earlier. The military already has working prototypes of fully robotic trauma units that can be deployed in what looks like a shipping container onto the battlefield and being used there as an emergency stopgap until that soldier can reach a more acute care facility. Great use of technology there, particularly in the battlefront. But, as what has been mentioned going forward on this, there's no doubt that computers become more sophisticated and that you'll see it. But Dr. Bottles, who is one of the leading areas of experts in this, and the Health and Human Services argues that within 5 years, many of the social humanoid robots, avatars, chatbacks can be used, but they will be used to supplement the knowledge. They'll be used to do the simple things. And particularly in areas that he calls rules-based chronic disease. And because if you look at them, we understand it very well from a scientific standpoint. It can be diagnosed and treated by the computer. And he argues that this leaves the doctors free to diagnose and treat chronic diseases, which require more intuition, more reasoning, which we still don't have today. So chronic diseases like schizophrenia, mental diseases, and others are going to be beyond it. You're going to see places where, particularly in specialized areas, where robots and AI excel at doing one thing repeatedly. And when they focus, they can become pretty good at it. You will see more and more expert opinion being used there, and you'll see it. But, computers can separate conversations, but from a technical diagnosis, there's still ways that they work, but they cannot do it. You begin to see that. The recent article in the Washington Post really points this out well, that maybe some primary care physicians will lose their jobs, maybe some specialists might lose their jobs, but we still need some kind of human healthcare professional to talk to us, to feed our information, to take part of us and interface with it. And you need to look at where professions like accounting today, where they're already combining computer and human elements to get the work done. You begin to just really take where it will happen. And one of the most difficult things, as Marshall brought up, is how do we get over the hurdles of seeing machines replacing humans in healthcare and liability? If you see what one of the largest cost burdens is, it's really the liability of the clinic, the liability of the hospital, the liability of the doctors and others. And, you begin to see a machine cannot take on a burden of imposing exactness to be subject to the liability side. How are we going to begin to take and do the certifications that are required? Are we going to see board certifications for the robots? Are we going to see board certification for the AI programs that are going to be used? I think not. A recent article in Medical Experts, I'm going to quote it just because it makes so much sense. Of course, machines will not always get it right, but like autopilots and aircrafts and autonomous cars that are right around the corner, robots do not have to be perfect. They just have to be better than humans. But on the other hand, will the human respect it? Will the human understand it? Will the human have empathy with it and is free to share what they believe they can do? So indeed, technology is very, very useful today in augmenting a physician's workflow and maybe improving the quality of decision making. But can technology truly replace what it takes to be a human physician and the very, very crucial patient-physician relationship that is unique to each individual? After all, this humanist approach to healthcare, where the doctor, the nursing, the care team, the continuity of care that is there, that is why the practice of medicine is often described as the art of medicine. And this art of medicine is what is going to be extremely difficult to replace and automate by robots and artificial intelligence. So that is the opposition's close.
Thank you, our honorable opposition leader for today's parliament. We have our another analyst. He joined after the debate. Maybe Mr. Jason will comment on our debate, or he can share some of his view. Now I request our honorable Prime Minister of today's parliament, Professor Rob, for the concluding remarks.
Well, the problem we're facing, the problem the opposition kind of glossed over, is in the United States, there's going to be a shortage of between 37,000 and 124,000 physicians within 12 years. World Health Organization says there's a shortage of 4.3 million physicians now. We don't have enough physicians. So the question isn't, will robots replace doctors? It should be robots are going to have to replace doctors because we don't have enough doctors. And the only way we're going to get to scale in terms of medical procedures is if we somehow are able to supplement doctors, extend that capability to cover our shortages, or otherwise we're going to have an awful lot more dead people. And we certainly saw that during the pandemic. The opposition made some interesting arguments. The opposition argued about liability, but liability with regard to robotics is settled law. We've been working on robotic liability back to the beginning of automation, and looking at the early Ford plants. And when there was a problem with a robot, Ford wasn't liable. The manufacturer of the robot was liable. So liability flows in robotics through to the manufacturer. That's settled law, and even so, it certainly didn't change or alter the flow of robotics into manufacturing. Robotics and manufacturing. Common today, and robots have replaced a large number of jobs that were otherwise held by others. Painting is largely done by robots today. Much of the major assembly is done by robots. The only things that continue to be done by people are some of the fine assembly, and even that, as we look at electric cars and Tesla's assembly methodology, a lot of that's been displaced by robots as well today. And the question is really, will robots ever replace doctors? Not will robots replace doctors tomorrow? The audience asked a couple questions. Will a robot revolution lead to mass unemployment in the medical sector? Given the level of shortage of doctors that we have now, while it may do that eventually, that eventually is going to be off into the future, because right now we don't have enough doctors. We're not dealing with a surplus. So at least initially, where robots will be applied is where doctors aren't, not where doctors are. And so there'll be a period of time when we'll understand what the displacement level of doctors will be. And while eventually it's going to require doctors to probably play very different roles, because robots will do a number of things better and do a number of things better today than doctors. Like any level of automation, what people do is they move to the fringes and robots take over the volume. Now, there's one exception to that prediction, and that's the pandemic did change an awful lot of things. There was a program I attended with regard to automation and robotics a few years back, where the speakers argued that rather than replacing low-wage workers, robots were better at replacing high-wage workers, because you could make the economic example and drive it forward through purchase. Of Baxter, the robot that was designed to replace generic assembly line workers, failed because people were cheaper. But the pandemic made it so we became very aware that we didn't have enough people. And that's changed the dynamic. Areas that were on the back burner for automation and robotics, like fast foods, are now on the fast track for robotics, because they can't stay open without the people. And so they're aggressively now putting robots in, because they've got a choice of going out of business or not. And they're making the choice to stay in business and automating, which I think is kind of interesting. The opposition argued that robots don't have the dexterity of humans. Interesting argument, and certainly given the fact that a lot of the early examples of robotics in medical care were done with manufacturing robotic arms, arms that were designed for other uses and then converted to medicine. But Sutherland University has now constructed a robotic prototype. They did it back in 2019, where they're able to fully emulate muscles with shape memory wires, and create a level of dexterity that matched what an elephant can do with its trunk, and do it at scale. Certainly a level of dexterity that currently cannot be done by human hands, but might be able to be accomplished with trunk level dexterity at a hand level at scale. So that's something that hasn't been implemented yet, but proof of concept's been done, and the technology is reliable. Remember that the statement was "can ever replace," and ever means we move off into the future. The opposition also argued about anesthesiology of all things. Interestingly enough, the SAA publication on anesthesiology has predicted that robots will replace anesthesiologists by 2030. The initial tests and studies indicate the robotic anesthesiologists significantly outperform human anesthesiologists. And if you look at some of the errors that have occurred with human anesthesiologists, and that's a level of high litigation. A lot of anesthesiologists fail in the operating room, often because they're overworked and they're tired, some because they've got substance abuse problems. But these are the issues that robotics don't have. And anesthesiology is something that does lend itself very well to automation, because it's largely a procedure that works off of metrics that are captured from the person that's under anesthesiology, and then a set of procedures that are relatively rigid with regard to what you do during the anesthesiology process. So the errors tend not to be equipment failures in anesthesiology; they tend to be human failures, and thus a robotic anesthesiologist can and has outperformed in test human anesthesiologists. So that's already settled. The talk on inductive reasoning was also interesting. Professional AI.com did a paper on inductive reasoning in AI, also indicating we're on a short path to being able to solve that problem. Computer industry has been working on this for decades, as several people have pointed out, and it's a high-profile project, also looking to be addressed in production in the 2030 timeframe, but already being performed in test and performing very well. The opposition argued that robots cannot do empathy the way humans do, which is kind of funny, because that's one of the areas where robotics currently are outperforming humans at scale and in production. Not in medicine, that they're doing it in sales. the insurance organizations figure for the first place you're going to apply a technology like this is to sell people insurance they probably don't need. But insurance organizations that have deployed robotic conversational computers have reported a significant uptake in close rates. And as pointed out in past discussions, they had an interesting problem of male prospects actually asking the computer out on a date, which would certainly either imply, and I'm not going to argue this point, that guys, because it wasn't women that did this, the guys may have a much shorter critical list in terms of what they consider to be a mate than perhaps women do, and that may be a problem with us than the robotics. In terms of virtual healthcare, the demand for virtual healthcare right now, healthcare using robotics, is the reports are actually showcasing a growth of 83% in this particular area, and the use of robotics and conversational computer in terms of initial triage have gone up dramatically. The issue again is, and when you have a disaster and you need to do triage, you invariably don't have enough people. And during the pandemic, using a triage on phone, digital triage became a popular way of solving the problem, and a very effective one. There are a variety of companies that do this and are selling to the market with hundreds of thousands of customers. Unifor is one of the companies, but Anchor also, ANKR also is performing and in production in this area at scale with over 10,000 active users right now. And over 200,000 pages of content and support for the technology. And then finally, Velsys is a leader in digital surgery, and they are in operation as well with robotic surgery. The system is in production, mostly focused on high volume surgery, like knee replacement surgery, but robots have proven to be more effective. And in terms of robotic surgery, if you've been looking at my hair and remember that maybe about a year and a half ago, I was fairly bald in the front of my head, that my hair was done and replaced with a robotic surgeon, and it is indistinguishable from my natural hair, and the scarring from the extraction site is non-existent. You may have seen pictures of humans doing hair transplants where they generally use plugs, and you could certainly tell that the hair had been transplanted if you cut the hair short. Here you cannot tell that my hair was artificially transplanted. It was done by a robot. So the government says that not only can robots displace doctors, they have been displacing doctors in certain areas. In terms of medicine, I am an example of a robotic surgery myself, and certainly with regard to telemedicine, they have been used aggressively. While the opposition has pointed out that yes, they're doctors in the back end, it means you don't have to have a doctor on site, and so where you would have typically had to have a doctor on site with telemedicine, you do not, and so that's at least one doctor that doesn't need to be there as a result of telemedicine, and that's been in place for decades. So. In all cases, not only can robots replace doctors, they have been replacing doctors and have been doing it at scale. The other question, robots and doctors, robots and computers and robots help doctors to do better, and that's the reason for the longevity and well-being of people nowadays. Do you agree with the statement? Yeah, I do. It's robotics has been replacing people and increasing safety in factories early on, and they've now moved into the medical institution. And if you walk just through a hospital, much of the operation of the hospital is now automated. Jobs that were done by nurses, and in some cases doctors, are now done by machines that can monitor 24/7, don't get tired, don't get angry, don't have emotional difficulties, don't have substance abuse difficulties. They just work. I should point out one of the issues that has come up recently with regard to automated medical equipment and been highlighted in places like John Deere tractors is the use of lock-in and the requirements that some of these companies are putting into maintaining these robots, where you have to use their technicians. One company, I believe it was Merrick, that deployed respirators had a requirement that they could only be serviced by technicians from the company. and a large number of respirators failed. And the technicians, because they were all not allowed to travel, couldn't get to the site. The only thing that kept a large number of patients alive was one of the technicians had swiped the access code and delivered it to the medical institution so they could re-enable the respirators. So one thing to be concerned about when we move to automation is the behavior of the companies that are deploying these automated products and making sure that they don't use lock-in technology so that you can repair them if you need to. So in terms of in time of a crisis, you're not left with a bunch of machines that could operate but don't operate because the manufacturers locked you out. That's a serious problem and something we need to address. One final question out here is there's a good book you may want to talk about called Economic Singularity, Artificial Intelligence and the Death of Capitalism. I'll certainly look at the book. That's a good recommendation. I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds like a good recommendation for Anna Reed. So in the end, the government says that not only can robotics replace doctors, they do initially that they will supplement. I agree with the opposition that the initial play here is to supplement, but with a shortage of 4.3 million doctors in the world and the very likely reemergence of pandemics and global problems, tragedies at scale locally, fires, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods due to climate change, our need to do that supplementing is critical. And so not only can robots displace, they should displace it, and we need to aggressively move to make sure our citizens are covered, and that where possible we can apply automation so that better than no doctor, they at least have some care, timely care, and we can save the lives that otherwise will not be saved. The government rests.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, for today's Parliament. We have our debate analyst for today, Professor Kimberly. She's chair for NC State University. Thank you for joining today. Professor Kim, actually, we organize every Friday this mock Parliament. We have government side and we have opposition to this government, like Prime Minister, Professor Rob and Professor Donalds, and our oppositions, Professor David Smith and Mr. Marshall. And you and Mr. Jason will be the analyst for today's debate. This is mock Parliament. It's an Asian parliamentary debate. There is another popular format, British parliamentary format. So in you know that in March we have Nikola Tesla Technology Conference. So many world famous and world champion debater, they will attend with our World Talent Economy Forum team. And hopefully it will be very, very interesting because world champion Harish Natarajan's Sir Sadiq Abdul Rahman, his minister for Malaysia, Muhammad Abdul Latif, they already confirmed from Oxford, from International Islamic University, and from Cambridge University, they will attend. So our debating actually very popular format, but your contribution will be more valuable for us because we can understand different view from industry and from academia. Professor Kim.
Very good. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation when you break down robotics replacing humans, which is, that's the definition of a robot, is a machine that's being instituted to replace the human job. But I don't know what my job is as an analyst. I'm sorry. I will sit and listen. I would like to make a point of something that we are in a shortage of doctors, but we shouldn't try to replace them because all of the data that is used, in particular to do the surgery that you had, is gathered from the doctors and put into a database. And that's how the robots learn. The robots learn from the humans and from the data that we put into it. So we don't need to be replacing all of our doctors with robots because one day we're going to run out of new data. So we need a balance, but I'm very disappointed in our system in not supporting and influencing more medical professional people. And it's purely because of the way our system is, which is another totally different argument. But we need both. We need both. And at the rate that population is growing, we need both at a high level. And I think that we just need to be very careful not to rely on robots only. But go on. I'm loving the conversation, and I love the example of your hair surgery.
Thank you.
Maybe they can do plastic surgery too.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jason, what's your concluding remarks or what you want to add for today's session?
Well, like Rob mentioned that book earlier, The Economic Singularity. I think it's pretty interesting. Callum Chase. And there's the theory that there'd be like 50% possibly of people unemployed. And me and some friends at the USTP, we have a discussion going, and we have researched, well, I won't say all of it, but as much as we could find to try to give us an idea, just how likely we figure this is going to happen. And if it is, then we are going to have a debate about what will be the most ideal governmental system to replace, because we don't think that our governmental system is going to handle 50% unemployment too well. I don't think. So, if you any of you are interested, we could possibly bring that debate over here to your forum, Sharif. It's an interesting topic, That's it. Go ahead. Back to you.
Thank you. This is really interesting debate, and especially Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, and other speaker, how they bring different issues of the robotics, engineering, and improvement of the artificial intelligence and computers. It's really important because we have to understand, because especially I'm from Asia, from the developing world. We know there are many misconceptions. Why we organize this kind of debate, we have to understand the real industrial information. And I want to give special thanks to all of our speaker, how they supporting World Talent Economy Forums. Last 2 years, actually, it's become very popular, and our government agencies, our NGO, our academy around the Asia Pacific, they took it very seriously, and that's why we are organizing very interesting projects. You know that from next month, with Singapore, we are developing a leadership institutions. We are working with Singapore governments, and we will help Singapore citizen. Beside that, 24 June, we have very special program with Central Bank of Bangladesh and Central Bank of Malaysia. We are working on climate change policy development. So I want to invite you all to engage with us, to engage with our community this way. We can minimize the gap. We can understand each other. We can understand different cultures, and we can take many initiatives. And especially, I just want to share. This is very special conference for World Talent Economy Forum. This is real innovations. This is very important because World Talent Economy Forum actually advocate for modern science, engineering, and technology. So Nikola Tesla Technology Conference is very important, and already we are working with more than 15,000 scientists around the world, and many scientists, they confirm they will join, and our debaters, our speakers, our board of advisors, all of them are they will join in. I believe they will join in our forum. It will be hybrid. You can join in online, and beside that, we are organizing this event in a palace in India. Actually, Indian state government, they are helping us to organize this event. And King's also supporting World Talent Economy Forum. So hopefully it will be very interesting. We will organize this event in this palace, Jhargam Palace. Very beautiful, but it's very small. We only can cover 30 people in this palace. But beside that, the government agencies and the state, the local NGO, they are organizing more accommodations. if 500 people go there, they can join. But hopefully it will be very interesting. BBC actually supporting our event. They will telecast all of our activities. Beside that, definitely I already discussed with Professor Nick Palveda. This podcast, IBM TV, they can be our partners. South Asia, they can be our partners. Good News, they can be our partners. But I can ensure also we are working with India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, like Inter South Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, Australian Prime Minister Office. So hopefully many famous peoples around the world, they will join, and especially our speakers, our board of advisors. And why we are taking this kind of project? We want human progressions. Many peoples around the world, they ask me, what is the objective of World Talent Economy Forum? I'm very, very honest with you. For me personally, I do not need expensive car. I do not need savings in my account. I do not need very expensive house. I do not have, but only I value human progressions. And that is the objective of World Talent Economy Forum, and how we getting support from around Asia Pacific. I'm impressed. I'm impressed, and I want to give special thanks to all of our speakers, how they're supporting us, how they motivate our people, how they enjoy the heart of government agencies and different corporations. So hopefully this Nikola Tesla Technology Conference will be one of the largest science and technology and innovations conference around the world, and hopefully you will enjoy. And I want to give very, very special thanks. Yesterday I also said that like our North American friend, even today, all of them actually from North America, how you think, how you actually contribute. This is important for our national development. I always say to our youth communities, if you, it's my belief that if you want to develop your leadership skill, if you want to develop your knowledge, visit, now I said visit North America and meet with this kind of mentors, because they can change life. How passionate they are for human progression, this is important for me, and that's why we are improving. That's why World Talent Economy Forum, and everyone like our family. So hopefully we can contribute more. So thank you, Madam Kimberly, for joining today's session. Mr. Jason, for your continuous support. Professor Donalds, Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall. I really, really thanks how you contributing for World Talent Economy Forum, and prepare for next debate. It will be very, very big debate in our conference, final day. And yes, definitely we are inviting all of the state head parliament member as an audience to join in your debate. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye.